We welcome on Eno Sarris to the Just Baseball Show, writer for The Athletic, host of the Rates and Barrels podcast, creator of Stuff Plus, the newest member of the Fantasy Sports Writers Association Hall of Fame. And Eno, your starting pitching rankings just came out on The Athletic. That was a long-winded intro because you are a legend of the industry. It is so great to have you on. How is the offseason treating you?
Pretty good. All those things just mean I'm old.
I'm just thinking, going off of that, we were joking about it before you came on, where you make the joke that you're old, but you're a Hall of Famer already. You're still very much in your prime of your career. If we're talking about like a playing career, what is it like to be in the Hall of Fame, but still be adding to your resume? Because it's so different than what we're used to usually for players. No, managers will kind of see that, but again, you push the boundaries with Stuff Plus and new things all the time. Yet, you're being recognized as someone that has a lifetime of achievement. And that's got to be a pretty cool, balance of things.
It's a little bit weird, actually. Yeah, because, you don't want to rest on your laurels, and something that can happen with fantasy because it's so cyclical and because baseball is so cyclical, you can just do what you did before. You can kind of be like, oh, okay, this time of the year I do my pitching ranks, and this time of the year I do this. And you can kind of just fall into a thing where you're not innovating. And so I just try to think of things differently. It helps. I think that I'm an immigrant, that I came to baseball and I came to this country, and I came at it with a sort of a fresh look. And so sometimes I see it and I wonder, like, could you do, like, what would baseball on the moon be like? I try to come up with just like weird ideas to kind of spur on a little creativity. And one of the ideas that I have that I can't do yet because the data isn't public, but I know the teams have this, is I'd like to do a bat path grade. So the way that I think of Stuff Plus is like, stuff is the physical characteristics of your pitches, and just the nastiness of your pitches. Location Plus is your command. That's breaking a pitcher down into its components. I'd like to do the same thing with a bat, where I'd say, I could have a path grade, like Path Plus, and that might have bat speed in it and bat angles. And then I'd have Decision Plus. That's like almost like the Command Plus for a hitter. It's like Decision Plus is not only do you like swing at strikes and not swing at balls, but like maybe a little bit more granular, maybe make it count and pitch type adjusted and do some stuff there. So then I'd have, Pitching Plus and Batting Plus, and it'd be like what I'd done before, but it'd be hopefully further innovation. So I just try to stay with my sources within baseball, see what they're doing, try to think of things in a clean new way. And not just be like, well, job's done.
And we're going to talk about Stuff Plus. We're going to talk about some pitchers that you're high on, hitters that you're high on. So this is going to be a great episode for all of our fantasy baseball listeners, or just enjoyers of baseball in general. But before that, I want to ask, what launched this passion for fantasy baseball in particular, right? You come over, right? You're from Jamaica, correct?
Yeah, I came from Germany at the time, but I was born in Jamaica, lived there for a long time, and then, went via Germany, came to Atlanta, Georgia. Yeah.
And then what prompted fantasy?
I actually shared a moment with Chili Davis, who's a fellow Jamaican who was born in Jamaica and played in the big leagues for a long time. He said that baseball is a way to be American. And so I was just coming to this country and being like, I don't want to feel like, somebody else. I want to be like, one of the crew. And so, they were out there collecting baseball cards. So I started collecting baseball cards, and they were out there playing stickball and doing the Julio Franco and doing the Gary Sheffield with the bat, so I was doing that. My sharkish sort of tendencies came out, and I started, winning my baseball card trades. And I started being like, well, if I don't get too attached to Mark Lemke and Jeff Blauser and all these like, mid 80s Braves, I can probably get some pretty good cards out here. Same time, my stepfather, after he split with my mom, moved to Vegas and started betting.
Mm.
on baseball. And so he's forever had this passion that runs into the numbers and runs into trying to predict the game and trying to, talk about who's the best, who's good, who's going to win tonight. And so I have both of those things in me. But one thing I like about fantasy baseball that's a little different from betting is I think there's more of a community aspect. When with betting, there's a little bit more of an immediate return on, you're investing and then you get an immediate return that day. There's a kind of a push the button, get the answer kind of deal. With fantasy baseball, especially season-long fantasy baseball, you have to put your money in and wait 6 months, And so that creates message boards, trading, getting, onto Twitter and talking about things and potting. I think a lot of the energy and community that we get comes from season-long fantasy. So I hope it doesn't fall behind because I think it's a cool way to like stay in touch with people. You think about people who like graduate college and like have a fantasy league together.
Yeah.
So that they can still talk trash on each other even though they've half moved to different cities. So that's I like that a little bit better than betting. So that's why I went towards fantasy with my career.
You mentioned that the sharkish tendencies and how you started to pick up on that when you're exchanging baseball cards and in a lot of different ways, fantasy baseball is very similar where, you're trying to, swap an asset for an asset that you think is going to be more valuable and do it before the other party is going to realize that it's going to be more valuable. But when did you kind of realize that you had this edge, right? That you had the maybe ability to take this information, if you put the time in and synthesize it a little bit maybe more effectively or more uniquely than your peers? Like when did it start to click for you that, hey, I've got a knack for this kind of thing and I'm able to maybe find some different angles that a lot of other people aren't?
Yeah, one of the things that I just kind of got to early was pitching. And, if you look at pitching projections, they're a little bit worse than hitting projections. They have been historically. And so that was an opportunity for me. And when I first got into fantasy, I had these silly rules like I'm not going to take a pitcher until the 10th round. And that was really productive for me because I was able to find undervalued pitchers. And that was back in the day when I was just looking at things like batting average on balls in play and being like, well, this guy struck out a lot of people and didn't walk a lot of people, so he's good, kind of more basic analysis. But and then I started writing about it and I had to tell people about it. So I lost that edge. And so I had to research my next edge while I'm telling people about my last edge. And then I had to tell people about it. And so I had to keep pushing and keep pushing and keep pushing. And so the interesting thing about publishing and playing, is that it can hurt you. I mean, I get into these high stakes rooms and everybody there, can easily jump on the Athletic and find my pitcher ranks and like they know who I've got circled. They know what my queue looks like, without having to look at it. And so, there are some downfalls, but the nice thing is we go back to that last conversation about, how do you keep pushing? If you publish and you play, you have to keep pushing. You have to keep pushing. There has to be something that you're working on that you haven't quite published yet, or you have to be more intimate with the insides and the outsides of Stuff Plus than other people because you've put it all out there. You have to know, little things about it that other people don't know about it. So, it's a constant pushing thing. But I had this one draft it was kind of, and I love Dynasty because one of the things that's interesting about Dynasty, you're talking about like I'm trying to trade, like I'm trying to win this trade in Dynasty, or in fantasy keeper situations, you can come to a trade where people have different temporal needs, time needs. So I'm trying to win now, you're trying to win later, then you can actually do some win-win trading. Which is nice if you've been playing with guys forever. You don't want to keep winning trades or whatever. It's kind of gets annoying. So
yeah, I'd imagine people are like, I don't want to trade with Eno anymore at some point.
I trade with you.
Yeah, right. So the I think the one year was, I'm trying to find this. Carlos Carrasco broke out, and it was the year he first broke out. So yeah, it must have been 2014. So let me look at the pitching leaders that year if I can jog them all. Oh yeah, okay, that was it. So in one offseason draft in this league called Devil's Rejects, it was a 20 team league and we all kept 28 players. So 560 players are off the board before we start drafting. We have a restocking draft to get to like 40-man roster. So you imagine 560 players are off the board. We're in the dregs. Like these are players that don't get drafted in regular leagues. And this is my first year in the league. And I jump in this league. And in the supplemental draft, I draft Carlos Carrasco, Garrett Richards, and Jake Arrieta. All the year they broke out. Like 2014 was their breakout years for all three of those. And Garrett Richards that year had a 2.61 ERA. Carlos Carrasco had a what did he have? A 2.55 ERA, and Jake Arrieta went on that pretty nasty string of good work himself. He had a 2.53 ERA. So three guys with the sub 3 ERA after pick 560 kind of announced myself in that league. Unfortunately, I changed the way people draft in that league. Because now, what does everybody do in the first 3, 4, 5 rounds of the restocking draft is pick veteran, pick starting pitchers that might have a role, pick, guys that might break out, pick the guys that have opportunity. One of the big things that I did that year, each one of them was different. Arrieta had opportunity in that Cubs rotation. Carlos Carrasco had, good strikeout walk numbers in the minors, and Garrett Richards just threw hard. I picked him because he threw hard. And so people have kind of taken that. And so now, I've had to try and innovate off of that. And, it's just, you're just always trying to get better.
So I really want to get into this Stuff Plus conversation, but now you have my brain titillated. Who right now, after pick 560, for people in a similar situation now in 2024, 10 years later, should be looking at the bottom of drafts that maybe you think will have an opportunity to break out this season for all of our fantasy people down there at the end of their drafts?
Yeah, I'm trying to look at the guys who didn't even make my rankings, and see what I can spot here. Jose Butto, with the Mets is an interesting guy for me because I think he has a legitimate out pitch, and there were some changes in his pitch mix. And one of the things you're always looking for is opportunity. So basically, as the 6 or 7 starter in New York behind veterans, that's an easy opportunity for me, in terms of making it on there. Joey Cantillo in Cleveland is basically the 6th starter, has had some really good numbers in the minors, and they may even trade away Shane Bieber this year. If the season doesn't go the way that it goes, the way they want it to go. I even like Johnny Brito, who's just traded to the Padres. Again, one of the ways that I look is not always just Stuff Plus. It's, Stuff Plus being good enough, maybe command, different ways that it can be good, but also opportunity. If you want them to break out this year, they have to at least be the 6 or 7 starting pitcher on the depth chart. And that's good enough because people use 6 and 7 starting pitchers in a given season. But that's where, I would get on Fangraphs. They have these depth charts. You can just look and see who's 6th, who's 7th, who do I like in this group? And that's where you can get your depth guys.
And on Fangraphs, Stuff Plus, has taken the baseball world by storm. Instead of just asking you what is Stuff Plus, I think a better way, because I think there is a disconnect between some baseball fans, right? Some baseball fans who want to turn on the game and maybe they don't want to go on Fangraphs and use Stuff Plus. Why should a baseball fan who's maybe not super into the data start trusting a stat like Stuff Plus?
Well, I have a data reason for you, which is awkward from that intro, but it becomes meaningful really quickly. So it just describes people's stuff really well, and it's predictive really quickly. So it's a strong stat. It's really predictive, and it tells you what you want it to tell you right away. Why you would care about it is, I think of a guy like Henry Rodriguez. It's this guy who used to throw 100, but it was straight as a bean. I think of Nathan Eovaldi. When he first came up, he threw so hard and everyone demolished his fastball, and it's because it was straight as a bean. And so you have these pitchers where sometimes you're looking and your eyes deceive you in a way where you see the velo or you see a big movement. There are also guys that have big moving sinkers that are actually kind of easy for people, to see for whatever reason. What Stuff Plus does is takes release point and movement and velo and puts it all together in a way that our brains don't always do that well. A lot of times we just go right to the radar gun and be like, oh, that guy's nasty. He's throwing 99. Well, is it as nasty as somebody else? What's the difference between like a Felix Bautista fastball and I don't know, somebody else who throws hard, but it's not quite as good. So, or like an early Eovaldi fastball. So, and then the last thing is there's this concept that's pretty fundamental to baseball, which is called ride, which is, you've got a ball that's countering the effects of gravity. And so it doesn't necessarily, you can actually see it with a beach ball. If you throw a beach ball with the right spin, a beach ball will go up. If you've ever done that, we try to throw a beach ball to somebody and you throw it and it has spin, it just goes up instead of like towards the person. That is happening in a baseball, but because the baseball is heavier and being thrown faster, it's not going up, but it is countering the effects of gravity. That's really hard to see with the eyes. Like like if a guy has good ride, Felix Bautista has some of the best ride in baseball. You might watch that with your eyes and be like, that's straight. That's just a straight fastball. Why is that good? It's because it's jumping on the hitters and they can't line it up. They have to trick their brain to be able to hit it. So there are certain aspects of stuff that the human eye is just not going to see that well, and the machines pick up well. So that's why I think Stuff Plus is interesting.
And what I love about that description is I think it's almost a way of saying that it gives you the hitter's perspective, because a hitter's going to come back to the dugout and say, that got on me fast, or, I thought I was on top of that and I just wasn't, or I don't even know why I pulled the trigger at that fastball up there. And for them, it didn't look straight, right? It looked different. So it allows us in the seats or, in our couch to be able to say, okay, that's why he took that swing that he took at it. Because it always drives me nuts when I hear somebody say like, oh, what are you swinging at? I'm like, well, there's probably a good reason why that guy swung at that. And we probably don't understand it. And that's what Stuff Plus helps explain. Now to peel it back a little bit further, though, you explain the concepts, and we've talked about it a little bit on the Just Baseball show, or actually a lot about pitch shapes and things like that. But of course, that's secondhand learning from people like yourself and, trying to explain, through the grapevine of what you've created here. But what is it that makes a pitch stand out and stuff in the eyes of Stuff Plus? Like you talked about kind of the idea that gravity, if it defies gravity, it's a pitch that has basically a differentiator from what we are used to seeing. So it's like standard deviations away from a generic fastball or a generic breaking ball from a generic release height. If you were explaining it to like a class of seventh graders or sixth graders, what would be the easiest way to describe how Stuff Plus is calculated and what makes a player more proficient in the eyes of Stuff Plus in an individual pitch, or maybe lesser in the eyes of an individual pitch?
To some extent, we're just trying to map like what's happened before to pitch velocities and movements and stuff. But one important thing is weird is good. And you were talking about that a little bit. Weird is good. The more normal this pitch is, the more it lines up with what they are training for every day, what they see in BP, what they see out of the machine. Like that's the more normal thing. The weirder it gets off of that, the better it is. I think one of my best examples is Paul Sewald, because Paul Sewald throws 93, 94. You watch him on TV, you might think, why is everybody missing? How does he have this great strikeout rate? Why is he a closer? He does not look like a closer. And part of the reason why is he kind of throws from this like lower slot. So your brain as a hitter says, okay, this guy's throwing kind of sidearmy. So side armors in the past do everything goes side and goes down. It kind of fades. This is what side armors do. This is what I expect. And then he kind of throws a little bit of a beam from that, like a little bit of it doesn't ride as much as like a Felix Bautista pitch, but it rides a lot more than, like a Bradford. Bradford was this guy who threw from his knuckles, or like, true side armors. It rides more than people expect. And so it jumps up on them. And so when that jumps up on them, then that makes them, makes the slider even better. Cause now they're kind of like, I can't dive in, and hit that slider. And though the slider is not that great just by looking at its movement profile by itself, with that fastball and with that release point, now you're starting to get an understanding of what it's like to be, like you say, a batter in the box, because you want to dive and hit that slider because it's not that good. And you think that fastball is just going to fall away. So you really just think everything's going to be low and I'm going to golf this out of here. And instead he throws a bean up on your chest and it feels like it's going to explode into your head. And the next time you don't really want to dive in there on that slider. So it is a thing that it defines all the secondary stuff off the fastball, and it kind of looks at what an arsenal is like overall. But yeah, I think Paul Sewald is a good example of how you might not see it with your own eyes, and Stuff Plus helps you realize why he's good.
And Stuff Plus has become the mainstream now. A lot of people are referencing, this model in order to make projections, whether that be in fantasy or just general baseball talk. But you have been messing with this, creating this for years now. I'm curious about the timeline of Stuff Plus. Like, what was kind of a light bulb of, oh, now it's much better than when I first created it? Can you kind of take us through the timeline of what has been improved over these past few years?
Yeah, so that year that I took Carrasco, I now that I actually remember better, Carrasco, when he wasn't that good, but he actually pitched a little the year before, had two secondary pitches that had high whiff rates. And so the very first thing that I did when I started breaking pitchers into components to analyze them better was just look at the results on the pitches separately. And so when I looked at Carlos Carrasco, I said, wow, he has a slider and a changeup that both got high whiff rates. Like, he has what he needs to succeed. Now, the problem with that is, I ran into the problem of like Anthony DeSclafani's changeup. I thought it was good because in small samples it got whiffs, but it wasn't actually good. And if you threw it more, it would get exposed. So I realized, it's not just good enough to look at results in small samples. Like, here's R.A. Dickey. R.A. Dickey throws a knuckleball 85% of the time. If you look at the results on his fastball, they're amazing. He has like really good results on the fastball. But if he threw the fastball 50% of the time, it would get whooped because it's like 83. It's like, it's not a good fastball. So, when I realized that, I went into round two. Round two was like, okay, now we have pitch FX. Can we look at can we start tying aspects of the pitch to those results? So I started looking at what makes a slider good. And I was like, oh, velo is really important for breaking balls. We don't think of it immediately, but, velo and associated drop. Like, if you can throw a pitch 86 miles an hour with plus drop, it's going to be a good breaking ball, And I started doing that. And Harry Pavlidis over at Baseball Perspectives did that for changeups. I went and looked at fastballs. I was like, oh, ride is good. Like stuff that we take for granted now. I was like trying to figure that stuff out. And as I was doing that, I was like, well, this is still kind of frustrating because, I'm figuring out little pitches by themselves, but there's always, once you put them together in an arsenal, it's different, like the same pitch from one guy and another guy. The way I realized it was that like Jake Odorizzi learned his split finger from Alex Cobb, but Jake Odorizzi's was never as good as Alex Cobb's. And it's like the same grip, and he learned it from the guy. So I was like, okay, I was starting to think about like slots, arm slots. And I did this thing where I actually I tried to predict movement just based on release point. And then I looked at people whose movement was very different from what you would predict based on release point. That was actually kind of an early Stuff Plus thing where I was like, oh, wow, some guys like Josh Hader, he throws from a sidearm, but he throws with his hand vertical. And so Josh Hader looks like he's going to be Chris Sale, but he's not. It's all like kind of more vertical. And so I started being like, okay, at some point we need to kind of put this all together. And that's where Stuff Plus was born. It was like we anchor it to the fastball. We start looking at movements based off the fastball, because the fastball is what everybody is trying to hit in the box. Mm-hmm. And so they're timing to that. They're thinking about that. And so any breaking ball or any secondary has to kind of be defined off of that. And so that's Stuff Plus uses machine learning and does stuff that I can't even explain myself, but it does find a way to explain that.
Well, and I think it ties into your Seawald example perfectly because, most pitchers from that release point, as you mentioned, are going to have usually more horizontal movement than vertical movement. And he has slightly more vertical movement than horizontal. It's like 14 and 10. So
Yeah.
my last question as it pertains to Stuff Plus is kind of along those lines. That's an extreme example, but assuming pitchers are less out sideways and we're just talking about release height in general, something we talk about a lot is induced vertical break and release height and how, one or the other or a little bit of a combination of both can really make you, closer to that outlier territory. Is there like a tipping point where it's better to have the 20 inches of vert at a 6 foot release height or a let's say 15 to 16 inches of vert from a 5.5 or 5.4 release height? How does Stuff Plus or just yourself in general kind of synthesize and differentiate what's more valuable, more ride from a higher release point or less ride, but from a much lower release point? And I assume results kind of dictate that, but what
Not
was that
really. I mean,
process of sorting that out?
it's a different answer. It's I don't know. That's what I don't like about this because I publish, I write, I want to educate, I want to tell people, and the problem is that Stuff Plus, like, it's doing all these little calculations, and it's comparing all these little things, and it's horizontal release point, it's vertical release point, it's vertical movement, it's horizontal movement, it's all these things. I got to put pitcher height in there because Bailey Ober is throwing from a certain release point, but he's 6'9", and that's got to be different than like Sonny Gray throwing from a very same release point, but being like 5'9". It's like there's more that can go into it. But what I would say is that if you want to look at something like vertical approach angle, that's not explicitly in Stuff Plus, but that's what it's capturing.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to sometimes adjust it for where they're throwing in the zone because that'll change. Vertical approach angle is like just trying to draw that line of the pitch coming across the plate, and that's different at different heights. But in any case, vertical approach angle will give you a good sense of that relationship between release point height and IVB and what's good and what's not.
So go check
if
out.
you can look at vertical approach angle for Paul Sewald and you can compare it to someone who's a little bit more over the top and has normal IVB and sort of start to get at that vertical approach angle, will capture what you're talking about.
So go check it out on Fangraphs. Go to the pitching section of Fangraphs and then go to pitch modeling and you'll see the Stuff Plus leaderboards. There's also Location Plus, Pitching Plus, everything you need to make the best projection possible. And if we're talking about projections, your top pitchers just came out in terms of fantasy on The Athletic. We'll link that in the episode description as well. Always does an amazing job. So if you are getting to a fantasy draft, make sure to use these rankings to make you a better fantasy baseball player. I have a couple of questions about some certain players, but I definitely want to open it up and ask you about some guys that you're really high on, and we'll talk about hitters as well. But the first question I have is about Kyle Bradish. Kyle Bradish finished second in Stuff Plus last year, right? The fastball was always kind of his issue, lowered the four-seam usage, but his breaking balls are just pitches from hell, right? They're darting all over the place, and he was extremely successful. But on your starting pitching rankings, he's falling outside of the top 15, but he was second in your Stuff Plus model. That's why I really wanted to ask you, what do you think Kyle Bradish looks like in 2024?
Yeah, so the best use, I think, of Stuff Plus for evaluation, like the way we're using it, there's two really strong ways to use it. One is in season, in a debut. Stuff Plus can tell you after one start a lot about that pitcher. So you got a young guy coming up, maybe he didn't have prospect pedigree, but he had some good numbers in the minors, and you're wondering, which way is it going to go? You're in a league where this Sunday, do I pick him up? Or how much money do I put on this guy when I'm trying to pick him up? Do I bet on him in a second? Do I DFS him in a second start? That sort of stuff. Stuff Plus is going to tell you a lot quickly. It can tell you how good a fastball is after 50 fastballs. So one start you're getting to know a lot. 2 starts and you know all you need to know from a stuff plus standpoint. What happens though is that after those 2 starts, other on-field results become more important. So stuff plus is really powerful in the smallest of samples. It's really powerful with relievers. There are pitchers that succeed year after year that don't have great stuff plus. Aaron Nola does not have above average stuff plus, but he's been who he's been for such a long time. Max Fried, the model does not like Max Fried. Maybe I'm missing something and I'm always trying to make the model better, but the model has never liked Max Fried. And yet he's one of 7 pitchers with a sub-3 ERA in the last starting pitchers with a sub-3 ERA over the last 3 years. So, the model can take some L's. It's not going to be perfect. And so with Kyle Bradish, the best thing you can do long term is to take Stuff Plus and fold it into a projection system. And so that's what I've done with Jordan Rosenblum. Is what you can do then is you can age it. You can age the components. You can age the fastball Stuff Plus. You can age the secondary Stuff Plus. You can do park factors. You can look at where Stuff Plus affects results and then use on-field results in other places. You can kind of pair what we've done before in pitching projections with this new information. And what we've found is that Stuff Plus has the most impact on K percentage, batting average on balls in play, and home runs per fly ball or barrels allowed. So Stuff Plus is suggesting that pitchers do have some control over balls in play. And so you add that all up, Kyle Bradish gets a 3.64 projected ERA with a 25% strikeout rate, and that's great. It's really good. It likes Bobby Miller a little bit more. Bobby Miller has outstanding stuff and a wider arsenal, a better fastball. He's got a 100-mile-an-hour 2-plane fastball. Bradish's fastball is only okay. So that's where I ended up ranking him. It's my first go at the rankings. Maybe I'm going to push these guys ahead of Aaron Nola, who's kind of been off or on again. One of the model doesn't like Tarek Skubal, and so I have Skubal ahead of him because the traditional models love him. But maybe I move that. Freddie Peralta had the best strikeout minus walk rate in the second half last year. He's just barely above Bradish. So it just becomes hard at the top, Like, how far do I want to push him? But I do believe in Bradish. And I would point out that Bradish is a big Stuff Plus win because in 2022, when Bradish wasn't any good, he had a top 20 slider by Stuff Plus and it was 22nd in baseball in Stuff Plus. So he was right there, with Kevin Gossman in Stuff Plus in the year that he was not good. So, I tend to bet on guys that weren't that good, but had a high Stuff Plus in their second years, especially young guys, because the Kyle Bradish model worked for me.
How about the guys that were really good and then weren't that good recently, like a Dylan Cease? I'm trying to imagine, because I was excited to see where you ranked him, and I almost wanted to have you put like a GM hat on for a second here because you're hearing what the asking prices are for Dylan Cease, and that he's going to be somebody that probably might not even get moved at this point if the asking prices are what they've reportedly been. But we've seen what he's been in the past. We've also seen what he's been more recently. There's no denying the stuff. The command is obviously a part of the issue, but you rank him at 30, in your top pitching rankings. And I think that's right around where a lot of people would have him, but you could probably see some people who are bullish expecting a bounce back. How do you assess a guy like Dylan Cease, who has had such a Jekyll and Hyde couple years where he's still young? You don't really know what it's going to look like next year, but like you said, you can kind of model it out and project it. Where did you feel like things were at, both in the model and in your eyes, on a Dylan Cease? And, based on that, would you fork over a package of significant prospects to get this guy?
I think so. The model actually likes him a little better than I did. So the model suggests that I should probably have him closer to Kyle Bradish. He has a 3.67 projection to Kyle Bradish's 3.64, 29% strikeout rate projected, then 25% for Kyle Bradish. So like the model might say, hey, move him ahead of Kyle Bradish and move me definitely into the top 25. I'm just a little nervous as a human being that's ranking these on top of a model. is that the command was so bad last year, and also his breaking ball started to morph a little bit into each other, making him kind of a two-pitch pitcher with bad command. The reason why it works so well for Strider is he has good enough command. The way he explained it is, if people keyhole me and think high is hard, low is breaking ball, then all I have to do is throw a low fastball in the zone, and then now they have to think about multiple things. With Cease, you wonder sometimes if he can do something like that. It's a little bit scattershot. And location plus is not as predictive as stuff plus, but it does tell me something in that, guys with a location plus of 95 and 96 and lower, there's not many of them. So as starters, they become relievers most of the time. And so the other guys with command as poor as he had, last year, Carlos Rodon, that's, I think, a big reason why he got blown up the way he did. Charlie Morton, as he's getting older. Edward Cabrera had the same location plus as Dylan Cease last year. So it's like bottom shelf command, but that 29% strikeout rate is enough for me. I would trade for him. And the thing about command is it kind of goes in and out. I think that my personal theory on command is that you can, like Carlos Rodon, look at him. He was throwing 96 last year, but he got blown up. But he had this back injury and the forearm strain. So command to me is the small health issues that you still can get on the field, but your back is barking or your knee is barking, or like you can't land on that front foot the way you want to, or you're not pushing off the right way. Something little is happening and you're not putting it where you're not used to putting it. And so the bad news of that is it can come and go. The good news is for Dylan Cease, it can come and go. Like next year could be a better year command-wise for him.
A pitcher with historically good command is very high on your starting pitching rankings, and that is George Kirby of the Seattle Mariners. I want to talk about him, but also some other guys that you are maybe higher on than the general market is, right? You've been noticing, all right, I put out my ranks, I see other people's ranks. Wow, I'm a lot higher on this guy than the rest of everybody else is. I think everybody is high on George Kirby, but number 5 is a statement,
I mean, he's a savant, dude. Like, it is one thing we did find with location plus is it's more predictive if you lop off the bottom half. Like if you just look at the guys who are good at it, they remain good at it. And he had, I think, the best location plus in baseball last year, or just said more colloquially, he had the best command in baseball last year. George Kirby is the command guy in baseball right now, but his stuff is inching forward. He was like, I'm gonna throw Justin Verlander's slider, and then he did, and then he's like, I'm gonna throw it 89, and then he did. So then he said, I'm gonna throw a splitter, and he did. So he's got this sort of savant-ish, like, I'm gonna do whatever I can to push this stuff forward.
Even threw a knuckleball. Like he
threw a knuckleball
for fun.
Yeah. So I that's something that is a little bit the human on top of the model. But even our projections, 3.59 ERA, 24% strikeout rate, it's just not quite the same strikeout rate as the guys around him.
Who else would you point to that maybe you're higher on in the market?
Logan Webb, just excellent stuff. And 200 innings last year, 200 plus innings last year. It's in a market when we're having a hard time getting guys to throw 150. So I just feel like it's maybe the best floor in baseball, or maybe Garrett Cole has the best floor in baseball and Logan Webb has second best, which is high praise. So I've got Logan Webb inside my top 10, whereas other people don't necessarily have that same approach. I don't know. I just love the grouping of Bobby Miller, Grayson Rodriguez, Kyle Bradish, and Yuri Perez. I know that other people love them. Maybe other people have them higher than I do, but those 4, you can circle them and, maybe wait a little bit and just grab the last one, because you're going to get a young guy who has amazing stuff. And I think you're going to have great results this year.
My last question for you is kind of tying back to the initial conversation of how you made your living here, which was maybe identifying some of these pitchers who won't be on many people's radars. Maybe it doesn't need to be somebody like Peter had mentioned, like 500th in the draft, but even just looking at the back half of the top 100, arms that you have here in these rankings, Who's someone that you think could really bounce back in a big way? I'm even looking like Trevor Rogers at 77. He barely threw last year after multiple injuries, and the year before had struggled. Like that's a guy that I'd be interested in seeing, or like Luis Severino at 75. Are there any other names that you have that you feel very confident, or at least are very intrigued by their probability of either getting back to where they were, or even making a leap forward after what was maybe a half step backwards last year?
Yeah, Hunter Brown had an amazing first half and a really terrible second half. And I've heard his descriptions of what went wrong mechanically. I'm just really happy that he had above average locations for the year, and in the first half had great stuff. I think he can get back to that stuff with just a couple mechanical tweaks because he has a great history of multiple breaking balls with great results in the minors. So I think Hunter Brown is going to be a lot better than people might expect after, finishing the last 2 months like a 6 ERA. I also like Cutter Crawford a lot, and he's got a really good fastball. He's got multiple breaking balls. I think he's got like 3 breaking balls and a splitter. And for some reason, he had a 6 ERA in Boston and like a 3.3 on the road. And I know Boston's a tough place to pitch, but it almost seems like it's mental at this point because you look at the strikeout minus walk rate, you look at the pitch mix, almost everything's the same, and then there's a 6 ERA. So he's going to have to figure it out sooner or later. And I would just I don't know what it is. I did a piece about mounds and how people felt on mounds, and they all rated Boston as one of the worst.
Huh.
And I think it's actually sort of psychology because the backstop is close, the fans are on top of you, and the green monster is just laughing at you over your back shoulder. And so you just feel like claustrophobic in Boston. Like, every hit you're going to give up is going to be smacked. So Cutter Crawford is somebody I think he could take a step forward and figure that out.
I got two more questions for you. Number one, we talked about a lot of guys that you're high on. Who's the pitcher that you've noticed that you've ranked a lot lower than maybe the market is saying?
Yeah, I have a harder time with these kind of older guys with wide arsenals and good command, where the fastball is really dwindling. And I'm just worried, when is that fastball velo going to get too low and it's not going to work anymore? So Eduardo Rodriguez and Chris Bassett, for me, are in the low 50s, and they could be lower. Honestly, their projections are for like 4.7 ERA, 4.6 ERA with no strikeouts. And it's just not, I don't think the game is going that direction, like in terms of, the game values strikeouts. And, but Eduardo Rodriguez got a decent contract. He's in a decent park, so I struggled with where to put them and how much to ding them. But those two guys I have lower than most people.
And you've at least gotten as close to mastering the pitching side, at least from a projection standpoint, as anybody. That's why you're a Hall of Famer. But you also know your offense. Who are a couple of players that fantasy baseball nerds like maybe ourselves, or just fantasy baseball people in general, just baseball fans, should be on the lookout of big offensive seasons?
Well, sometimes I look for bounce backs in early veteran, after 33, 34 it gets a little bit rough, but right at 29 to 31, they can have a bad season due to injury or something and bounce right back from it. So Cedric Mullins is a guy I have circled that is going late in drafts and has 30 stolen base potential. I've gotten him as my third outfielder in a couple places, and you need 160, 170, 180 steals now to be competitive in your leagues, in your season-long leagues. And, getting 30 steals with non-zero power where you can get them. I think Dalton Varsho is similar in that at least he's going to give you homers and stolen bases, and you can look in his history and see that he's had different approaches. Right now, he's pulling everything in the air. Could he do some of that and do some more spraying? Could he find it, soften that out and get some more line drives and get that batting average up to 230, 240 instead of really as low as it was last year? If he can get to 240, he's a 2020 guy. That's pretty valuable where he's going in drafts. And that's a couple of outfielders, but Thairo Estrada is just one of these boring guys that just doesn't get enough love. He's like a 2020, 250 guy every year. He's not too old where you expect it to fall off. Everyone thinks that just because he's in San Francisco, they're not going to play him that often. It's going to be, one of these things, but he's an excellent, excellent defender at second. I think they're just going to plug and play at second. So, he's just one of those, sometimes we call him oatmeal on Rates and Barrels where, they don't have the hype and no one's circling their name, but they're just valuable every year.
It's a good breakfast. Fills you up.
I have one more too. I'm sorry. I had
Go
to
ahead.
look at one more thing. Yoshinobu Yamamoto. We've talked about him a
Uh,
lot on the podcast. I think one of my favorite things I was able to put together this year was kind of breaking down his arsenal from, like an analytical standpoint, kind of explaining how he's very, very unique with the low release, the carry he gets, and also some arm side run. The whole arsenal's nuts.
uh,
But it's also his first year in Major League Baseball, and it's going to be a lot of spotlight and attention on him. You have him at number 8. What does it take? What is a successful year for Yoshinobu Yamamoto, considering that, you don't have some of the same information that you have for some of these other players? It's a little bit harder to project ERA and things like that. What would be the absolute like success story for him? And then what's kind of the baseline you think for his first year?
Well, the baseline projections fall in the sort of mid threes category with more than a strikeout per inning and excellent command. I think they
Pretty
might
good.
be missing the boat a little bit on home runs. They're all projecting, a fair amount of home runs where he barely, like, I think he gave up like 3 home runs all year or something last year. So, like, I don't know. He's not going to do that in the majors, but I also don't think he's going to have like a 1.4 home runs per nine, like Steamer says. So, in terms of like superlative success, I could see him doing a low threes, high twos, ERA and having a great season. The thing that I would see that I would love to hear in spring or something is about a slider because the cutter is his worst pitch. And he's a guy who can really he has like a Adam Wainwright, Max Fried-esque big curveball. And if
Mhm.
you think about it, Adam Wainwright never really developed a great slider to go with that. But Max Fried did develop a slider that's almost better than his curveball. He uses a lot now. So if there's any question other than maybe his size and durability, I just want to know about his slider because this is a slider league, and that's the only thing I couldn't circle. I was like, yes, plus plus elite fastball, yes, plus plus elite splitter, yes, plus plus elite curveball, but it's a slider league, and I want to know about the slider.
So basically, what you're saying is the Dodgers have to bring back Clayton Kershaw because he's got the big loopy curveball, but he's made
And
his
he
money
learned
off
a
that
great
slider.
slider.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
Dodgers, you heard it here first. You have to bring back Clayton Kershaw. And saying heard it here first is the most hilarious
Well,
thing to say because I think all Dodger Nation wants Kershaw back.
yeah, that's right. But Kershaw picked up his slider in spring training as a major leaguer. And even if he doesn't sign with them, he'll be around. So I wouldn't be, and that would be a great grip, I think, for Yamamoto. A great sort of an 89-mile-an-hour gyro slider would go really well because all of his other pitches have such great movement. To have kind of a bullet slider in the middle of that's what he's trying to do with the cutter. So that's what I would teach him. I would try to teach him Kershaw slide. I mean, I know he's a lefty and Yamamoto's a righty, but that's what I would try to teach him, a tight little bullet slider.
Yamamoto with Kershaw slider. Yeah, I see that.
Game
Yeah.
You
over.
know, thank you so much for coming on. This was awesome. Kind of a great fantasy baseball preview here on what's today, February 1st, February 2nd, whatever day it is. Greatly appreciate you coming on. The closer ranks are coming out soon. What else should people be on the lookout for with all your great writing?
Uh, just just trying different things. I've got, this is the time of year where I have a lot of projects and nothing's really on the top of the table. But on my podcast on Rates and Barrels, we're going to announce a new rotating guest shortly that I think people will like, and we're going to take a slightly new direction. We're going to explain some of these things. We talk about IVB, and you talk about horizontal and vertical approach angle. We're going to try to explain some of these things with someone who's played the game. So that'll be a cool way for people to kind of understand these concepts if they don't understand all the words that are being thrown around.
We can't wait to see that. And I'm also excited to speak to you next when you talk about your new edge, tying it back to the beginning of the episode. When you find an edge and then you explain it, then you're already off to the new thing. So very excited for the next time you come on to Just Baseball. Exactly. Something. We're going to find something here from Eno. But again, thank you so much. And make sure to go follow Eno on Twitter. We'll link it in the episode description. Eno, appreciate the time.
Thanks for having me.